guys, I am here to film Lincoln's birth story for you. Yay! Lincoln is now 7.5 months old, so I did give birth to him a while ago. We were planning to do a home birth. Almost my entire pregnancy I saw both an OB and a midwife. Oh wow. My midwife was absolutely incredible. She was very wise and knowledgeable, and one of the things I liked most about her was that she wasn't unwilling to do interventions. She helped me decide when an intervention was necessary and gave me guidance on how to make those decisions, which I really, really appreciated. I was born 10 days late, so my whole pregnancy I kind of expected to go overdue, and I knew that that was more common for first-time moms. Anyway, that didn't change the fact that I got very impatient as Lincoln's due date approached. My due date was November 18th. The whole week leading up to my due date, of course, I was very impatient to have my baby, and at that point we didn't find out the sex of our baby. I was like 85% sure that we were having a girl, but obviously I was wrong. My family was here and we were all so excited, and I really wanted to have Lincoln before Thanksgiving so that I wouldn't be huge and pregnant for Thanksgiving, but that didn't happen. So days went by and days went by, and my midwife did several membrane sweeps, and they helped me get like half a centimeter more dilated, and I think by the third sweep that we did I was like 1.5. So nah, they didn't really do much for me. When I was 41 weeks, I wanted to do an ultrasound just to make sure that there was enough amniotic fluid in there. I knew that going overdue has some risks, not nearly as many risks as him being born early, but I still just wanted to make sure that everything was okay in there. So we went in to do the ultrasound when I was 41 weeks, and my midwife came with us to that, which was wonderful. Having her there was very helpful. We did the ultrasound, and the tech was very young, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but she seemed kind of inexperienced, and she told us that she was using a new machine that she wasn't really used to. Her measurements of Lincoln told us that he was going to be 11 pounds. I did not believe that he was 11 pounds, but because of that, they started trying to push me into a C-section right then. They were like, you need to go in today and get this baby out with a C-section. And I was like, whoa, that is taking it a little far. I know how inaccurate these ultrasound measurements are, and the tech told us that she wasn't very confident in the measurement, so I was not very happy at all that they were immediately pressuring me into having a C-section. However, I did agree to be induced a couple days later if nothing had happened. And I have to admit that part of that decision was based on the fact that I wanted to have a baby before my parents left town. My midwife came and did another sweep and gave me some castor oil to try that night. And she very much told me this is kind of my last resort to see if we can get things going naturally before you go in and have the induction. So I took the castor oil. I did have some loose bowel movements and very slight cramping with the castor oil, but it did not get anything going, and I didn't dilate anymore from that. I was still hoping that I would naturally go into labor that night, but he was too comfy in there, weren't ya? So we went in at 6 in the morning on Saturday, and part of the reason we picked that day was because there was a doctor who is the most supportive doctor there of natural labor. She came in and talked to us in the morning, and she gave me two options. We could do Cervidil or a Foley bulb, which I had like barely heard of. I didn't really know what it was. What the Foley bulb is if this is your cervix, it's a tube with two balloons. The balloons go on either side of your cervix, and then they fill it with saline solution. So it basically pushes on and squeezes your cervix open. So the goal was to get me to a 4 with that, I believe. So we put that in at 8:15 in the morning, and I had to keep it in for 12 hours. As soon as we put it in, I started having more intense cramping than I had been having, basically mild contractions and some loose bowel movements. The next 12 hours were not horrible, but I was in early stages of labor basically. I had pretty darn consistent cramps and contractions for those 12 hours. Luckily, it worked, and as part of the Foley bulb they told me to tug on it occasionally to just see if it would come out, because if it came out that meant that I was at least at a 4. I would tug on it occasionally, but it never came out at all, which I was kind of discouraged by. I was hoping that it would kind of go faster than the 12 hours, but it was okay that that didn't happen. During that time we hung out with my family and played some cards, we watched a movie. It was pretty relaxed, and the amount of pain I was in was pretty minimal. Relatively close to the end of the 12 hours, the contractions were getting slightly closer together. Matt and I did some abdominal lifts for about an hour and a half. I'll show you what they were like on Lincoln. We'll see how happy he is about it. So basically, when I had a contraction, Matt would cross his fingers, are you not going to be happy about this? Like this on my belly, and lift up and in, which was supposed to put more pressure on my cervix and help it dilate more. After the 12 hours of the Foley bulb, so this is around 8:15, 8:30 Friday night of being in labor, I was at a 4, which I was so excited about because it had never really felt a lot looser when I tugged on the Foley bulb. Oh, bless you. Bless you. So I was very excited to be at the 4. That felt like a little victory for me. And I was 50% effaced and -3 station. So then after that, the doctors were so wonderful to give my body a few hours to see if the labor would progress on its own. I was so grateful for that opportunity. Unfortunately, and Matt and I did some more abdominal lifts through that time, and we walked a lot around to try and encourage things to get going, but it just didn't. After those couple hours, I was still at a 4. At 10:50 that night, we started Pitocin. And I knew going into this that Pitocin kind of starts this cascade of interventions, and until that point I hadn't had to have an IV in, and I could walk around and do whatever I wanted, and I knew that if we had to do Pitocin it would kind of lead to other things, which was true, but everything, I'm totally pleased with how everything went. So at 10:50 we started Pitocin and I went to sleep, tried to get some rest before the Pitocin really started to kick in. At 2:30 a.m. I woke up with more intense contractions. They were more difficult to manage. I was having to breathe and concentrate during them. So at that point we called my midwife to come join us. She came around 3 in the morning and made Matt sleep. She was just like, you need to go to sleep, I'll hang out with Aaron, you rest, which was great. Unfortunately, going to the bathroom was like really hard because of all the things that I was plugged into, and because of the IV I felt like I had to go to the bathroom more frequently. So every time I had to go to the bathroom we had to like unplug the monitor, unhook me from the IV and the Pitocin, then I could go to the bathroom, which was usually hard with the contractions. I almost always had a contraction when I was on the toilet, and then for me that made it more intense. One thing that I totally remember from this time was that the blood pressure cuff was like worse than the contractions. And I mean, the contractions were pretty bad at this point, but they had this automatic blood pressure cuff on me that would go off every couple minutes or something like that. And it hurt so bad. It squeezed so tight, and that made me way more angry than actually being in labor did. Another thing that was really annoying was the monitors that they had watching Lincoln. Since I was on the Pitocin, I had to have those monitors on all the time. Kept slipping around, and they would have to come in and adjust them. So finally at the shift change, a really nice nurse named Kim showed us this. It was basically just an elastic belly band, and we put it around the monitors and it helps them stay in place so much more. So I really encourage you, if you have to have the external monitors, to ask if there's one of those bands that they can put around your belly to help them stay in place more. For the next part of my labor, I labored on a exercise ball, mostly leaning on Matt in between contractions. Poor Matt, I like put so much weight on his back. His back was killing him for the next few days because every contraction I just really wanted to relax and lean on him. I remember another thing was that he would try to like rub my shoulders or rub my head to make me feel better, but if it put any amount of downward pressure on my body, I got really, not like really mad at him, I was just like, don't push me down, because it made it significantly worse whenever he put pressure downward on my body. The contractions were the most intense when I laid in the bed on my left side. they were just like one on top of the other and so painful, and I could not really handle that. That was something that I didn't anticipate about having a natural labor, was that the more painful positions are actually good to be in because it means that your body's making progress. I had always heard about attempting to relieve pain during natural labor, but my midwife definitely encouraged me to stay in the positions that were more painful because that was what was most productive to get my baby down and out. After a few more hours of those kinds of contractions, they checked me and they said that I was at a stretchy 6, 90% effaced, and -2 station. So I was very pleased because I made progress. We were going somewhere and I could handle this pain of being in labor if I knew that it was productive and going somewhere. Matt and my midwife kind of switched on and off, staying with me and helping me through contractions. They were continuing to get more intense. I had been really good about keeping my voice nice and low during contractions, but around a few hours after that check, my voice started to get higher during contractions, and I was carrying a lot of tension in my body. And I would like lift up and my shoulders would come up and I would just be so tense. And I think that if I had been able to relax more during the peak of a contraction, they would have been more productive. I started to feel out of control during the contractions, more like I couldn't handle what was happening to me. And at that point, my midwife suggested that I get an epidural, which I appreciated because I had been kind of thinking about it, but I didn't want to be the one to bring it up. I decided to wait for a few more contractions. I wasn't just going to be like, okay, yeah, give me my epidural right now. And then asked to be checked again because, again, I could deal with this if we were making progress. But I had not made any progress at all. In fact, they told me that I was a 5 when before they told me I was a stretchy 6 and 90% effaced and -2 station. So 0 progress in the most painful few hours of my life. So at that point I said, no way, yes, let's get an epidural. This is too much pain to not be getting any closer to having my baby here. I said, yes, let's get an epidural, and the anesthesiologist was so amazing. I've heard some horror stories from people about their anesthesiologists, but mine was so nice and so fast at getting it in. One of the things I remember about being in labor without the Pitocin, with just the epidural, was that I couldn't wear my glasses because every time I had a contraction I wanted to like lean my head on something, and so then my glasses would like dig into my head, so I didn't want to wear my glasses because I was also like laying on my side a lot. So after I got the epidural, I could put on my glasses and I could see, and that was like the best to me because I didn't recognize like half of my nurses. I never saw their faces. My eyesight's really pretty darn bad. So that was kind of fun. People would come in and say hi to me. I'd be like, sorry, I don't actually recognize you. I don't remember your name because I never saw your face. So I had to like re-meet a lot of the people. It was kind of funny. The next step, they wanted to break my water, and there were so many interventions that I had originally not wanted, but my midwife truly felt like they were a good idea and I trusted her judgment completely. It was funny. They went to break my water and then they were like, did your water already break? What's happening? And it turned out that my amniotic sac had prolapsed, so it was like sticking out of me a little bit. So all the nurses thought that it was really funny, and they broke my water, but they didn't have to like reach up inside because it was already kind of hanging out. When they did that, my blood pressure dropped really quickly and scarily. This was at noon, by the way. So even though not a lot of water came out when they broke my water, it had a huge effect on Lincoln. His heart rate dropped into the 60s. I think it would have been really scary to a lot of people, but I just trusted that the people taking care of us really knew what they were doing. So they gave me an oxygen mask and had me lay on my right side, and they were really watching Lincoln's stats, and I just tried to breathe really deeply and relax, and he came back up and was totally okay. But it was basically a big blood pressure drop from the epidural that coincided with when they broke my water. At that point, because his heart rate had dropped so intensely, they wanted to put in an internal monitor, and that was another thing that I had originally wanted to avoid. But for one thing, the external monitor slipping on and off was not doing a good job monitoring him. It kept picking up my heart rate instead of his, and since his truly had dropped so intensely, I agreed to go with that. And they also put in a monitor to measure my contractions more accurately. They dropped my Pitocin a lot after his heart rate dropped, and then they just brought it up really, really slowly, which was kind of frustrating for me because I was like, I just want to get this baby here and out of me. This was 12:30, 1 p.m. the second day. So I had already been in labor for 28 hours at this point. Gradually, my contractions got stronger. At least at my hospital, the epidural had to be on a really strong dose for the first hour you have it, and then after that you could bring it back down. So after the first hour, I had them drop the epidural dose to the lowest that it could possibly go. And that was really good for me because I could move my legs, I could feel my legs, and I could feel the contractions a little bit. They just weren't painful. So I was super, super happy with my epidural. It was great. And at that point, it was great because my parents and Matt's parents could come in. I didn't want any of them there while I was in the throes of labor, but it was really nice to have the epidural and have them be able to come in. We opened some presents. I just relaxed. It was really, really nice. We kept asking if I was having what they called adequate contractions, and I don't remember how they defined that, but they were basically going to check me again once they said I was having adequate contractions. And I felt like my contractions would have been really intense if I could feel the pain of them, and they were coming pretty frequently. So I felt like I was making progress, but they kept saying that they weren't adequate. Finally, around 6 p.m., a doctor came in to check me and said I was at a 10. And I was so excited! It was an amazing feeling because I had just spent over 24 hours in labor, 12 hours with Pitocin with no epidural. Then it was time to push, and I was so thrilled. We asked if we could wait a while to push because I wanted my body to be able to push him down on its own, and they were totally okay with that, which was wonderful. I asked at that point if we could turn the epidural down, and they said yes, so we turned it, I think, maybe even completely off at that point. I told my parents that we would probably let Lincoln labor down for 20 or 30 minutes, and my midwife said that it would probably be quite a while longer than that. I guess I just kind of had a gut feeling that it wouldn't take him that long to get down. I think I caught a little bit of a nap in there, but it wasn't very long until I started feeling pretty significant pressure. And at first my midwife just waved it off. She was like, oh good, you're feeling some pressure, we'll wait a while longer. And I'm like, no, like I really feel significant pressure. Around 6:30, I did actually have to start moaning through contractions again, which I really loved because it meant that my epidural dose was down, I could feel what my body was doing, and that was great. Eventually, I was feeling like even more pressure, tons of pressure down low in my body, and I was just like, what the heck? I'm just gonna check for myself how close this baby is. And I did, and his head was right there. I could feel his hair, and that was so incredible. So I told Dawn, I was like, I can feel this baby's head. And she said, no way, do you mind if I check? So she did, and she was like, oh my gosh, you're right, this baby is right there. It is totally time to push. So then we paged the nurse and told them that I was feeling a lot of pressure, and she checked and she was like, heck yeah, let's have this baby. We talked about pushing positions because I had never wanted to lay on my back while I pushed him. That wasn't really something I was interested in, especially if I had a really big baby. I felt like that increased my chances of tearing, but they wanted me on my back because I guess you could maneuver better if there was shoulder dystocia in that position. We agreed to have me do a couple contractions on my hands and knees, as many as we could do, and then when it was really, really time to push, I would go on my back, and I was happy with that compromise. Once I was on my back, they brought a mirror so I could see what I was doing, and I really, really liked that. Even though I could feel most of what I was doing with the epidural, it was still really nice to just have visual confirmation that I was making progress, and I could see his head, and it was so awesome. I remember there were funny wrinkles on his head when he was crowning, and I didn't expect that. I thought that all the skin would be like pulled back from the pressure, but a lot of it was like pushed forward. And I remember seeing his hair and the funny wrinkles on his head. Everyone kept saying how strong I was and how impressed they were at how fast I was pushing out my baby, which made me feel really good. It made me feel like, yes, not everything in this birth is going the way that I thought it would, but I am still a strong woman who can push out my baby. The doctors came in at that point, and it wasn't very long before he was really, really crowning. I almost got the last part of his head out in the last push of one contraction, but not quite, so I had to wait for the next one. I told everyone, we'll have a baby on the next contraction. Sure enough, the next contraction, his head came right out, followed by his shoulders and the rest of his slippery little body. I had always said that I wanted Matt to be the one who like said what the gender was, and I guess he did, but I didn't hear him. So they gave the baby to me and I was like, oh my gosh, it's a boy, that's not what I expected. But of course, I wasn't really disappointed or anything, I was just surprised. And I was like, oh, it's my Lincoln, he was so little. And then of course, we had the whole day, all the doctors have been like, I hear we're having a toddler today. He was supposed to be 11 pounds, but I never believed that. We had a good hour of skin to skin time. I was bleeding a lot, and it turned out that I had an internal tear. So the doctors were pretty frantically like trying to figure out why I was bleeding. It took them a long time, and they did some kind of uncomfortable like massaging of my uterus to try and get it to contract. And I tried to nurse him because I knew that that would also help. But since it was actually an internal tear, not coming from my uterus, that didn't help. Eventually they figured it out and sewed me all up, and that was fine. I also had a second-degree normal external tear. The one thing that I am disappointed at in my birth was that I felt like delayed cord clamping was something that could happen almost no matter what situation we ended up in, and I really believed that he would benefit from having that blood in his body. And they told me that they would do that, but they clamped it like 5 or 10 seconds after he was born, and that is something that I am actually disappointed in how it happened. So if you want delayed cord clamping, I advise you to mention it during your pushing phase and say, I want at least 60 seconds or however long you want before you cut the cord. And you could have, if you have friends and family there, you could have one of them in charge of helping you get your delayed cord clamping, because that is the one thing that I was actually truly unhappy with at my birth. I did get to cut the cord though. Matt wasn't interested in it for some reason, so I got to cut the cord, which was pretty special for me. Matt and I we love music and we love to sing, and Matt had been singing You'll Be in My Heart to him while he was still in my belly, and he was crying quite a bit after he was born, which is totally normal, and I was glad he was crying. That hopefully meant he was healthy. And Matt started singing You'll Be in My Heart, and he just immediately stopped crying, and that was so special. That was like the moment that made Matt and I both cry quite a bit, was when he calmed down after Matt started singing to him.